Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Beneath the Surface, 10 years of local groundwater basin stewardship. And thank you all for tuning in. My name is Indigo Bannister. I am the Sonoma County GSA's coordinator here to welcome you. Today, we will be going over a number of topics reflecting on the history of the GSAs during the From the Ground Up section that will be presented by Sandy Potter, our Petaluma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administrator. Next, we'll be going into Beneath the Surface, where Marcus Trotta, our plan administrator for both basins, will be talking about current groundwater conditions in both basins. Then we'll transition to the next drop, where we talk about a number of different programs and actions that the GSAs are currently taking, which will be presented by Andy Rogers, the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administrator. From there in this digital recording, we won't have time for questions or comments or our resource fair, but both of those options, we encourage you to continue to connect with us. As you see fit, please reach out. So with that, I am going to pass it on to Sandy Potter, our Petaluma Valley Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administrator, to talk about the history of the GSAs in the From the Ground Up section.
Well, thank you, Indigo. And it's just great to see so many board members and advisory committee members and folks from the Petaluma Valley and the Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basins here tonight. I have been involved in groundwater sustainability management from the beginning of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act, which we refer to and will continue to call SGMA here in this meeting. I was first involved assisting in the formation of the GSA governance, and then was part of the Santa Rosa Plain Advisory Committee representing the town of Windsor, and currently serve as the administrator of the Petaluma Valley GSA, a role which I've had since 2022. And it's just great to see so many of you. I know many of you have been involved in groundwater sustainability efforts, but there are others of you who are less familiar with the work of the GSA. So I'm going to be walking through an overview, about 10 slides, to provide an opportunity for us to all get up to speed before we dive into the two basins. So why were the GSAs, or the Groundwater Sustainability Agencies, formed? Despite local and statewide reliance on groundwater, California was the last Western state to regulate groundwater, and it did this through the enactment in 2015 of the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And in Sonoma County, there are 3 basins that were identified by the state as high-risk basins that required the communities to work together and come up with a plan to manage our groundwater resources. And these are shown in this map: the Petaluma Valley outlined in blue near San Pablo Bay, and the Santa Rosa Plain with the green outline are both medium priority basins. And then Sonoma Valley to the east is a high priority basin. Sonoma Valley GSA held their community meeting this spring. So with the passage of SGMA, the GSAs were created and specific authorities were provided to allow these agencies to manage groundwater. So I'm going to walk through some of these. The GSAs have the authority to assess fees, to require well registration and metering, to impose extraction limits, and also to acquire land and facilities for sustainability projects. The Sonoma County GSAs have taken a collaborative and incremental approach to this, and the only authority that they've acted on at this time is the assessing of fees, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later in the presentation. SGMA specifically does not allow the GSAs to require metering of typical residential groundwater users, and GSAs cannot make land use decisions about growth and development. Those authorities remain with the local cities and counties. The GSAs also are not responsible for issuing well permits, although all 3 GSAs work closely with Permit Sonoma in this county to review well permit applications. And the GSA does not maintain, fix, or drill wells. So with these authorities and responsibilities established, we were given 2 years to actually create the GSAs. And in Sonoma County, the partners, including the cities, the counties, the water agencies, and the resource conservation districts, or the RCDs, work together to form 3 separate GSAs by the deadline in June of 2017. And the GSA governance includes a board of directors and appointed advisory committees. And the groups work together with all the groundwater users and regional partners. For 5 years, they work to develop the groundwater sustainability plans. We call those the GSPs. And we were successful in completing those by the SIGMA deadline of 2022. These plans serve as a blueprint for sustainable groundwater management, and they're somewhat like a general plan in that they contain policies and priorities, but they also establish metrics for assessing sustainability progress. So we're now in the 3rd step, and this is our final task to implement the groundwater sustainability plans and to achieve sustainability in the basins. And SIGMA requires that within 20 years of the GSP adoption. So for our basins, that is in the year 2042. We've all been working together to meet the challenges of SIGMA so that we can maintain the local control and avoid state intervention in our groundwater management. This has required working with regional partners to ensure that all voices are heard and that this can inform the way that we sustainably manage the groundwater. So from the very beginning, the GSAs have had a robust public outreach process, and together we successfully adopted GSPs that were approved by Department of Water Resources and actually serve as a model throughout the state. In addition, we have engaged in an extensive public process to adopt groundwater sustainability fees to help fund the monitoring, reporting, and projects that are needed for sustainability efforts. And in the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about why groundwater is such an important resource in Sonoma County. So as you can see from the pie chart, the dark blue area, groundwater accounts for over 50% of the water supply of the county. And you can see that the Russian River system provides surface water mainly for urban users, a significant contribution to our water supplies. And then we also have small surface water that is derived from small creeks and streams that's stored and used in the basin, mainly for agriculture, and recycled water, commonly used for landscape and agricultural irrigation, which is a growing source of water supply. And so part of the purpose of this diagram is to show that there are a lot of pieces of the pie that make up our water management system, and they're all important parts of the puzzle. The GSA supports regional water resiliency planning and management, and we work closely with our partners to achieve that. So let's get into the details about what makes the 2 basins unique. You can see here that the Santa Rosa Plain is larger than the Petaluma Basin. And to provide context, the Santa Rosa Plain is the largest groundwater basin in the county, and it supports as a sole water supply over 8,600 parcels and 32,000 people, as well as over 20,000 acres of crops and vines. The Petaluma Valley has less than 1/5 the population in agriculture and provides groundwater to 6,000 people living and working on nearly 1,400 parcels. Groundwater is also an important source of drinking water and supplemental water supply for our city residents, and it is a critical resource for native fish populations, wildlife, plants, and sensitive habitats. So we're going to now jump to look at the unique water use patterns in each of the basins. As I mentioned, Santa Rosa Plain is the larger groundwater basin. It has more groundwater extracted and many more users. But you can see here that the majority of the water is split pretty equally between the three main users: agriculture, rural residential, and municipal. In Petaluma Valley, we have a similar picture, but here the agricultural sector is a larger presence, making up about 40% of the groundwater used, although the total groundwater pumped is much smaller than in Santa Rosa Plain. And additionally, the city of Petaluma relies less heavily on groundwater for municipal supplies, so it's relatively small at about 5%. There are some other minor differences you can see in the pie chart, but throughout the county, rural residents, farmers, and businesses rely on groundwater, and we can all help to manage the resource carefully. Sigma compliance comes at a cost, and since the GSA's inception in 2017, the agency has been funded by member agencies, county contributions, and grants. This sustained the agencies for 5 years, but in 2022, the GSA approved a groundwater sustainability fee to help support the effort. And so for the last 3 years, a fee has been collected. Currently, that fee in Santa Rosa Plain is $44.70 per acre foot of water. And an acre foot is about 326,000 gallons. And in Petaluma Valley, currently we collect the same fee. This is reduced by county contribution to equalize fees across the basins. I did want to make a note that currently the typical rural residential user fee is based on a half acre foot per year of consumption for domestic use, and that equals out to roughly about $22 a year. So the fees collected represent only 20% of what's needed to support the GSA's work. And the GSA is continually seeking outside funding to support sustainability projects and has been very successful in receiving grant monies from the state. So you can see in the slide that Santa Rosa Plain has brought in $7.4 million and the Petaluma Valley GSA $8.7 million. This photograph shows a monitoring well installation in Petaluma that's part of our current Department of Water Resources, or DWR, grant. And you're going to be hearing more about some of the other projects that grant is funding later in the presentation. But I also want to mention that we have secured additional outside services from the state that also support the GSA. So all of this comes together to achieve our goal to adaptively and sustainably manage, protect, and enhance groundwater resources in the county to make sure that we have clean and plentiful groundwater for our community and the environment now and into the future. And with that, I'd like to pass it to Marcus Trotta, our plan manager for all three basins. And Marcus is going to talk a little bit more about the current groundwater conditions. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Sandy. As Sandy mentioned, I serve as the plan manager for the Santa Rosa Plain and Petaluma Valley GSAs. And as filling that role, I essentially lead the technical implementation of complying with the Sustainable Groundwater Management Act. And I also serve as principal hydrogeologist with Sonoma Water and serve under contract to the GSAs. And I will be describing some of the conditions in our basins and describing how we use metrics to monitor for the basin's health for sustainability compliance. I'll briefly describe some of the groundwater conditions that we're seeing in both of the basins, which each have their unique features and future needs. And then we'll set the stage for Andy, who will follow me to describe some of the programs and projects we have been implementing and planning, which all groundwater users can help with. Next slide. So first, I'd like to start with a very short groundwater 101. This figure shows a very idealized depiction of an aquifer system. While the local geology which forms our aquifers is much more complex, this picture does illustrate the general way that groundwater behaves in our two basins. I'll first point out that groundwater is part of the overall hydrologic cycle. Rainfall that falls on the earth will either run off to a surface water body or infiltrate into the soil. A portion of that water that infiltrates will be sucked up by the roots of plants and evapotranspired back into the atmosphere. The water that makes its way past the root zones of plants will then eventually recharge our groundwater aquifers. The shallow aquifers pointed to here can recharge relatively quickly after rains and play an important role in supporting both folks with shallower wells as well as our local streams and habitat because groundwater and surface water are closely connected. Deeper aquifers are typically separated from shallow aquifer systems by low permeability clays or volcanics and can take much longer to directly recharge. These aquifers are typically tapped by larger groundwater users such as agricultural or municipal suppliers. Next slide. So while, as Sandy pointed out, groundwater sustainability must be done at the local level, the state does have standards for how it is measured and accomplished. And at its essence, the state regulations require that GSAs ensure that negative impacts to these 6 sustainability indicators, which are used to judge our basin's health, are not caused by groundwater pumping within the basins. I'll briefly describe each of these sustainability indicators in terms of what these impacts are and how they can occur. So I'll start with the key and most straightforward indicator. Groundwater levels. When groundwater is pumped at rates faster than it can be replenished, the water table will drop. And if this occurs each year, you can have chronic lowering of groundwater levels, which is what needs to be avoided. This condition could also occur the amount of groundwater stored in the basin to decline. For water quality, while there are numerous other agencies responsible for managing and enforcing water quality, the GSA's responsibility is to ensure that groundwater pumping does not cause negative changes to water quality. For land subsidence, in some areas of the state, overpumping is causing the land surface to actually sink, and aquifers are collapsing. This is known as land subsidence, which can cause damage to infrastructure, which is something that's occurring in the southern San Joaquin Valley in the state. Interconnected surface water. So as I mentioned, surface water and groundwater are closely connected in many areas, and groundwater pumping does have the potential to deplete surface waters and impact local streams and ecosystems. For coastal basins that are adjacent to the ocean or inland bays, overpumping can pull salty water in and contaminate freshwater aquifers. The GSPs characterize each of these metrics and set objectives and thresholds, which we monitor each year in order to gauge the health of our basin. So starting with the Santa Rosa Plain, I'll go through the status of each of these indicators. As I'll show, we are not currently seeing impacts to any of them in the Santa Rosa Plain. The state regulations also require that we project out future conditions out 50 years. And so when we did that and looked at potential future changes to climate as well as projected future pumping, we did see that in the future we could have declines in groundwater storage within the basin. And so that kind of highlights the need to start planning for different projects and actions. And then for some of our indicators, in particular interconnected surface water, we really don't have a lot of information to accurately gauge the health of that indicator. And so that is one area where we are actively working on filling data gaps in our understanding of how surface water and groundwater are connected within the basin. And so you'll learn more of that from Andy's presentation. Next slide. So looking at the groundwater level conditions within the basin, these two graphs are what are known as groundwater level hydrographs. I'm going to briefly describe how we use these to track groundwater conditions within the basin. These two hydrographs are from two different wells within the basin. The maps show the locations of where they're at. The one on the left is a shallower well in the shallow aquifer system. And the one on the right is a deeper well in the deeper aquifer system, generally greater than 200 feet below ground surface. And so these graphs show measurements from wells that have been monitored over time. You can see we do have some wells with a long history of measurements within the basin. Both of these wells were historically monitored twice a year in the spring, which are the orange dots, and in the fall, which are the green dots. And you can see how those fall and spring measurements vary. So you do have annual fluctuations in groundwater levels as between winter and summer months. The color patterns in the back show when dry periods occurred in the warmer colors, the orange and yellows, and the blue lines show when we had wetter periods. And so the other thing that we see with this data is that during drier periods, groundwater levels typically decline. And here we see that during wetter periods, they recover. And so that's a sign of a healthy groundwater basin where the groundwater levels are more influenced by hydrology. The other thing you'll see in all these graphs is as you get past about 2020, there's additional measurements that are collected. And that's because as we started more actively managing the basin under Sigma, we've increased the frequency of how often we monitor groundwater levels. So in some wells, we do monthly measurements, and in some wells, such as the one on the right, we actually have instrumentation in the wells that are continuously measuring groundwater levels. And so the pattern that we see in the deep aquifer system here, this is a well that's down near Rohnert Park, shows how groundwater pumping has historically influenced groundwater levels within the basin. Historically, Rohnert Park primarily used groundwater to serve its customers and residents. And groundwater levels had dropped in that area over 100 feet in some areas. Beginning in the mid-2000s, the city of Rohnert Park changed how it delivers water to its residents and started purchasing more imported surface water from Sonoma water. They also started utilizing more recycled water and were able to reduce their reliance on groundwater and groundwater pumping. And this graph shows how groundwater levels responded to that change and recovered. And so that's why projects such as ones that recharge basins or utilize other supplies, recycled water or surface water supplies when available, can help with basin management. Next slide. So these graphs show our modeled and estimated changes in groundwater storage throughout the basin, with the shallow aquifer system on the left and the deep aquifer system on the right. You can see there's a wide range of year-to-year fluctuations that, similar to what we saw in the groundwater levels, is driven primarily by changes in climate. And that overall, during this historical period, the amount of storage within the groundwater basin has remained relatively consistent. There's been an overall slight decline in the amount of storage, but overall, it's been fairly stable. When we do project out here in the Santa Rosa Plain future potential conditions, we do see the potential for future declines in storage. Next slide. For the other sustainability indicators, interconnected surface water, our current measurements we're within our sustainability range. And as I mentioned, we are working to address data gaps related to depletion of interconnected surface water. We're not seeing any current exceedances of our minimum thresholds for water quality and do not see any evidence for land surface subsidence in the basin. Next slide. So moving over to Petaluma Valley, similar to the Santa Rosa Plain, we're not seeing any current impacts to any of the sustainability indicators in the Petaluma Valley. In that basin, we also have interconnected surface water as a primary data gap. In addition, because that basin is connected to the San Pablo Bay, the potential for seawater intrusion to occur also needs to be considered, and we are working on filling data gaps related to that particular sustainability indicator. Next slide. So groundwater level trends in Petaluma Valley, we have 2 wells here. In this basin, we just have one aquifer system that's defined for that basin. So both these wells are from that single aquifer system. The graph on the left shows a well which has also exhibited relatively stable conditions over time. You can see that it does show larger impacts during drought periods, and so an indicator that some areas and some people's wells are going to be more vulnerable to drought periods based on the local geologic conditions, and that's what we're seeing here. But again, here we do see that the groundwater levels do recover during wetter periods. On the right is a graph that is showing a well that is exhibiting a slight declining trend. It's dropped about 15 feet or so over the last 35 years or so. So this is a well that's up in the hills, and we do see a couple wells in Sonoma Valley that have exhibited some declining trends. So this is an area where we are adding additional monitoring wells to better characterize whether this is just a very localized trend or whether there's other areas that should be more closely monitored in Petaluma Valley. Next slide. Similar to Santa Rosa Plain, the overall storage trend has been relatively quite stable in Petaluma Valley. The basin is largely mostly full. Groundwater levels are relatively shallow throughout much of the groundwater basin. And here, when we do project out into the future, we don't see any impacts to our sustainability indicators. So in Petaluma Valley, really the focus is on filling our data gaps and planning for future monitoring. Next slide. And then the last indicator in Petaluma Valley I'll describe is seawater intrusion. Again, here we really didn't have a lot of information on that potential for seawater intrusion. And so we have been actively working on constructing new monitoring wells, as well as doing some water quality monitoring from folks who volunteered their wells through a program that was funded by the grant that Sandy mentioned. We had several landowners volunteer their wells, which has helped us better characterize the potential for seawater intrusion to occur. And so those wells are focused on the kind of the transition area between the baylands and where we have brackish groundwater, and the more inland areas where we have fresher groundwater. So these wells will help us monitor in the future whether any changes occur from groundwater pumping within the basin. The 2 lines here show where concentrations of chloride, which is an indicator for seawater intrusion, may occur at levels that are unacceptable. And that's how we judge whether the basin's sustainable or not. So most of our sampling is focused along those lines. Next slide. Very similar to Santa Rosa Plain, for interconnected surface water, we're within the sustainability range and are actively working to address those data gaps. We don't see any exceedances of our water quality minimum thresholds, and no evidence of land surface subsidence here, as you'd expect in a basin that isn't declining. Next slide. So while the state's requirements are essentially the same for all basins, we do need to recognize the uniqueness of each basin when we consider how to manage and monitor and plan for basin sustainability. In the Santa Rosa Plain, our current estimate of existing extraction is about close to 18,000 acre feet per year. And we've also calculated the amount of groundwater that can be pumped safely within the basin to be about 23,000 acre feet per year. So our current pumping is within that range, and we're not seeing any current overdraft. As I mentioned, when we project out in the future and look at potential future changes in climate, we do see that we could have up to 2,200 acre feet of storage decline in the future, which again is 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 pointing us to the need to really plan for future resiliency and sustainability projects in the basin. In the Petaluma Valley, much less groundwater pumping, much less groundwater users. Our existing extraction is around 2,700 acre feet per year. Again, no current or projected overdrafts, and the main focus in Petaluma Valley is to fill data gaps and plan for future monitoring. In addition to those conditions, we also need to consider future conditions. And the next phase of our work in complying with Sustainable Groundwater Management Act is to evaluate our GSPs. That's something that the state requires every 5 years. And we're going to be kicking off that process this fall. Our evaluation to the state is going to be due in early 2027. And these are some of the sources of uncertainty that we need to consider when we evaluate how our sustainability programs are working, and whether we should consider any changes to our sustainability programs or refocus on certain projects and actions. So we know that weather has become more extreme, and we need to better plan for that. We will be working with local jurisdictions, the county and cities, on potential land use changes and how that may affect basin sustainability. And along with that, future population increases and other changes that may change our groundwater use patterns in the future need to be planned for and considered. And so that's all going to be part of the process going forward. Next slide. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy, who's going to describe many of the projects and programs that we're actively working on that you can be involved in, because the GSA and groundwater users both have a shared responsibility to sustainably manage our groundwater aquifers.
Great. Thank you, Marcus. A lot of information, I know. My name is Andy Rogers. I am the Santa Rosa Plain Groundwater Sustainability Agency Administrator, a role I've served in since 2018. And so now that we've reviewed why and how the GSAs were formed, we're given a sense of the conditions from Marcus on both groundwater basins and the approved plans in place to achieve sustainability. I wanted to share an image of what sustainable groundwater basin might look like in a program sense. And really, this image, hopefully it does a little bit of that. Essentially, what we're trying to do is create a sustainable system, support to sustaining a system. So we want to increase the amount of water that is recharged into our aquifers from the ground surface, from rain, from reservoirs, from creeks. And at the same time, be very smart and conservation minded about what kind of water and how much comes out of the basin. So we are preserving storage. In order to manage that, we have to closely monitor the conditions of the basin. And Marcus showed a number of ways we are doing that and paying very close attention to it. And that way we can make good decisions about if we need to adapt or adjust. And then really what I'm going to do in the next number of slides is talk about those three components of our basin sustainability, but also the programs that we can participate in all together in bringing us to sustainability by 2042 and really co-steward our resources. Next slide. So Marcus mentioned the need to fill data gaps. Really another way of saying that is we need more information. And through grant funding in particular, we are doing an awful lot of work these days to fill those data gaps to get more information. We are constructing new monitoring wells in places we don't have much information. So we are learning not just about that particular location, but about what is going on beneath that location in terms of water resources. We are conducting studies, all kinds of studies, kind of the interaction between surface and groundwater, a very important component where there's a lot of information that needs to be gathered to have a really thorough understanding of that. We have databases that we've been updating, old ones that we're updating, creating new ones. It's about having a thorough understanding from a number of perspectives. And of course, I mentioned the monitoring piece. Marcus just talked about the seawater, not just the groundwater, the fresh groundwater, but the seawater relevance to the basin, and a number of other things. We have, at our workshop today, we have tables to learn about any and all of these things, and I encourage you to go visit the tables. Next slide. So, as I mentioned before, really, or Marcus mentioned that we really need to work together. This is our shared resource, and the more of us that are participating and understanding in its sustainability and the importance of keeping it sustainable, the better off we're going to be. So we have are launching and have already created a number of programs that I'm going to summarize here, and really just to tee up the interest and the overview so that you can go to the various tables we have here with our many partner agencies and experts to learn a lot more. Level Up is a great example of a collaborative data gathering. So the GSA is doing monitoring, our member agencies are doing monitoring, but there's an awful lot of parcels in each of the basins. And so the more people that are certainly gaining a better understanding of their well and their water use and where the aquifer is beneath their property, the better off we're going to be. So we have a program of gathering data twice a year, in basically the wet season and the dry season, and evaluating that information to see where the basin as a whole is going every year. Not only does it provide us more information to manage, it engages more stewards to participate in taking care of our water. FlowSmart is another grant-funded program where we've made available meters. So if you want to know exactly how much is coming out of your well and you're using, putting a flow meter on your wellhead or in your conveyance line is the best way to do it. They're extremely accurate. You can know if you have a leak or not. So if your faucet's not on and it's still spinning, you know you've got a leak, and you can see how much water you're using over a period of time. Very helpful information. So we're up to 23 grant-funded meters that are being installed at grant funding expense. We have folks in the workshop here who can talk a lot more about that. Next slide. So everyone can help sustain our groundwater. I've said this in a number of different ways before, but our Well Aware program is a multifaceted program for education to support groundwater users and offer up ways to make water use more efficient on your property or your business. And it's also a mechanism for the GSA to learn about the good practices and the good ways that you're conserving water. So we can learn that and share that information with others so more people can practice the same thing. Through local partnerships the GSAs have with the Sonoma and the Gold Ridge RCDs, Daily Acts, the Sonoma Marin Water Saving Partnership, the California Alliance for Family Farmers, Master Gardeners, and the University of California Cooperative Extension. The GSA is actively developing and deploying groundwater sustainability programs. We have 3 programs I'm just going to touch on here. An online toolkit, some free consultations, and other resources and projects that are going on. Please, again, our partners are here at the workshop. Please connect with them to learn as much as you'd like to learn. They love talking about it. So the Well Aware Toolkit is an exciting online interface for you to learn about groundwater saving practices that apply to your specific parcel use type. It's a way to connect with experts to either provide advice or provide ideas to. And also it's a way to explore funding potential. I mentioned the FlowSmart already, that being one. There are others. So please check in with the folks here. Table 6 is the highlight to hit here, but I think just about any of them can talk about our Well Aware Toolkit. Next slide. So a newer program we're excited to show is our Well-Designed Landscape program. So this is a new branch of the Land Resilience Partnership that's tailored for well users in the Santa Rosa Plain groundwater basin. So the purpose of it is to help residents conserve water, reduce stress on private wells, cut costs, and prepare for, hopefully we don't have, but to prepare for the likely inevitable drought and future extreme weather. So what this is essentially a free site assessment from Daily Acts, and they're here to talk to you more about what that might look like. There's a free catalog of projects to look at to evaluate what might apply to your property. They can also provide savings estimates for various project scenarios, contractor referrals, and do-it-yourself ideas. Next slide. So, but back to that sustainability circle, we would really like to increase the volume of water that is going back into the ground. We want to minimize what's coming out and use, and then the water that's already out being used, we'd like to reuse it. So these are grant-funded projects underway in the Petaluma Valley in the Santa Rosa Plain. We have an aquifer storage and recovery, which is essentially looking at if we were able to take winter water, excess winter water, and be able to add it to our aquifer, would it be feasible to then efficiently extract it more in the dry periods. Stormwater recharge. So essentially, how can more of what falls onto the ground make it down to into our shallow aquifers? How can we increase that volume? And then recycled water, again, reusing water in more places in more ways, so we don't need to keep pulling fresh groundwater out or reduce the amount. We have tables here to talk about these projects. So again, there's a theme that's been repeated a few times, said in different ways. What can we do to ensure groundwater resources are sustainable? And really the best and most accurate answer is we all have to participate in taking care of our shared water resources in the Santa Rosa Plain and in the Petaluma Valley. We all have a shared responsibility, and we will all share in the benefits of doing so. We are going to be taking questions at the workshop. For those who aren't able to make the workshop, I encourage you to reach out to our GSAs. If there are programs you're interested in, we can connect you with the experts and the leads on those various programs. We are here to support our basin and certainly the groundwater users like you that depend on it. You can see here our website, SonomaCountyGroundwater.org, gets you to any of the 3 Groundwater Sustainability Agency websites. You have my contact information here, Sandy Potter, and then we can also put you in touch with Mark Estrada, who is the plan manager. I want to thank you for being here today, and we are looking forward to continuing on this sustainability journey.